The room was supposed to be routine, another committee hearing on an overstuffed calendar. But the tension inside felt electric, like the air just before a summer storm. Cameras panned across rows of staffers shuffling papers, trying to look busy while the audience sensed something brewing. 6 interruptions had already rattled the morning like thunderclaps, each one sharper than the last, each one daring the calm at the center of the storm to finally break. Representative Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly still, hands folded on the polished wood, eyes fixed ahead. She'd met long nights in law school, high-stakes cases in courtrooms, and the relentless grind of campaigning door to door. This was just another test of composure. Across from her, Senator Ted Cruz leaned forward with that familiar half-smile, part lawyerly confidence, part provocation. The microphones caught every breath as he launched interruption number 6, his voice slicing through the chamber like a sudden gust. A ripple moved through the crowd, aides exchanging looks, reporters' fingers hovering over keyboards. Viewers on the live stream exploded the chat with comments. Is he serious? She's going to end him any second now. Crockett inhaled, slow and deliberate, the kind of breath that says more than 1,000 rebuttals. A single beat of silence stretched across the room. Even the cameras seemed to lean closer. Then came the moment no one saw coming. She tilted the microphone slightly toward her, eyes locked on Cruz. Her voice, measured and unwavering, sliced through the hush. Senator, if I may. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They carried the weight of a gavel. The chamber froze. The livestream chat scrolled so fast it blurred. The tension snapped from simmer to boil in an instant. And just as the nation thought they'd seen the height of the showdown, a 7th interruption hovered like lightning waiting to strike. What came next would shatter the carefully built facade of control and leave every witness, on-site and online, speechless. But the real shock wasn't the interruption. It was the 7 words Jasmine Crockett was about to deliver. Outside the chamber, Washington pulsed like a restless heartbeat. Morning headlines had already teased the possibility of fireworks. 2 heavyweights, 1 hearing. But no article could have predicted the slow-burn tension now gripping the room. The first 6 interruptions had become their own legend before the committee even recessed. Journalists were live-tweeting every jab. Hashtags like #CrockettCom and #CruzCrossingTheLine trended within minutes. TikTok snippets of the 5th interruption were already hitting 1 million views. Viewers across the country were no longer casual observers. They were invested spectators, waiting for a historic clip they could say they saw live. Inside, the air grew dense with a kind of collective anticipation. Staffers whispered updates into earpieces, eyes darting between their phones and the committee table. Every shuffle of paper, every squeak of a chair sounded like a drum roll. For Jasmine Crockett, the noise was distant thunder. Her focus sharpened with each attempt to cut her off. Years of courtroom cross-examination had trained her to stay steady when others tried to steal the spotlight. Every breath, every glance was deliberate. Across the table, Ted Cruz leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming a rhythm only he understood. To some it looked like confidence, to others, a telltale impatience. He'd built a reputation on dominating exchanges, using interruptions like chess moves. The more resistance he sensed, the more determined he became. The stakes were no longer about a single policy dispute. They had evolved into something bigger, a test of restraint versus provocation, of composure versus spectacle. And both participants seemed to know it. Reporters lining the back wall whispered predictions. If he cuts her off again, she's going viral, one said, barely audible over the software of cameras. Another replied, he can't help himself. This is who he is. Millions watching at home leaned closer to screens, coffee forgotten. The comment feed scrolled in a blur. 6 times already, he's pushing his luck. She's about to own this. Here comes the breaking point. Crockett adjusted her microphone with a quiet precision that carried more power than any raised voice. Her eyes stayed fixed on the agenda documents, but there was a spark, an almost imperceptible signal, that those closest recognized. She was ready. Somewhere in that electric silence, the audience sensed a truth. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was a defining clash of demeanor and respect, the kind of moment that becomes a cultural reference overnight. The room seemed to inhale as one. Because if interruption number 7 came, and everyone suspected it wouldn't just be another headline. It would be the spark that ignited a confrontation destined to echo far beyond these walls. And the nation, holding its collective breath, was about to witness it unfold. Before the cameras captured the simmering showdown, Ted Cruz had already built a national reputation for turning hearings into sparring matches. To admirers, he was a relentless cross-examiner. To critics, a master of the calculated interruption. Either way, his method was unmistakable. Lean in, strike first, never relinquish the floor. Born to a family of educators and entrepreneurs, Cruz graduated from Ivy League halls with a resume sharpened for courtroom theatrics. Early in his career, he thrived on high-stakes oral arguments, where speed and sharpness meant survival. Those formative years forged an instinct to dominate any conversation, an instinct he carried proudly into the Senate. In Washington, that instinct became signature. Journalists recalled his marathon filibuster, 21 hours of near-continuous speech. Colleagues remembered late-night committee debates where he layered question upon question until opponents simply yielded. To his supporters, these tactics signaled determination and intellectual rigor. To his detractors, they embodied something less flattering, a hunger for spectacle over substance. By the time this particular hearing convened, Cruz's pattern was familiar. He often prefaced interruptions with a polite phrase, "if I may," or "let me clarify," but the effect was the same. Seize the mic, steer the narrative, unnerve the witness. Political analysts described it as controlled turbulence, a way to keep adversaries off balance while projecting confidence to his base. Yet beneath the polished performance lay a persistent controversy. Some colleagues whispered that the theatrics masked impatience with real dialogue. Editorial boards critiqued what they saw as a show-over-solution approach. Social media users clipped his most combative moments into memes, half in awe, half in disbelief. And Ted Cruz knew it. He wore the notoriety like a badge. In interviews, he'd smile when asked about theatrics, replying that passion was no sin in politics. For his supporters, that brashness was proof of authenticity, a willingness to fight when others settled for polite consensus. It was this very reputation that set the stage for today's clash. When he took his seat across from Representative Jasmine Crockett, he carried the confidence of someone who had weathered countless hearings and walked away commanding the narrative. Each interruption was more than a question. It was a calculated move in a long-practiced strategy. But strategies have limits. 6 interruptions deep, the tactic began to feel less like spirited debate and more like provocation. Viewers watching the livestream sensed it. Comment threads shifted from amusement to frustration. "Let her speak," one user posted. Another wrote, "Classic Cruz, push until someone pushes back." Inside the chamber, Cruz seemed unfazed. He leaned back, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, as if already scripting the next line in his head. But observers closest to the action noticed something subtle, a flicker of impatience when his interjections failed to rattle Crockett. Her calm was an unexpected variable in a game he thought he'd mastered. And that, more than anything, set the collision course. Because a strategy designed to dominate only works if the opponent plays along. Crockett wasn't playing. The air grew heavier with each passing minute, a silent countdown to the next exchange. Cruz's pen tapped a quiet beat on the desk, steady, insistent, like a drummer preparing for a climactic note. Reporters adjusted their cameras, sensing the inevitable. The 7th interruption was coming. And when it did, it would meet not the easy target Cruz anticipated, but a poised adversary ready to turn his own playbook against him. Long before she ever set foot in the marbled halls of Congress, Jasmine Crockett learned that silence can be stronger than shouting. She grew up in a working-class Texas neighborhood where neighbors shared more than block parties. They shared one another's burdens. Her parents, both tireless community volunteers, modeled an unspoken creed: service first, ego last. Saturday mornings meant food bank shifts, Sunday evenings, neighborhood cleanups. From those early years, Jasmine absorbed a simple but powerful lesson. Leadership begins with listening. In school, she was the student who bridged cliques, the calm voice when tempers flared. Teachers recall her uncanny ability to defuse playground arguments with a few measured words. That quiet authority drew her toward law. "The courtroom," she once told a mentor, is where calm can move mountains. Law school sharpened that instinct into skill. While classmates sparred to out-argue each other, Jasmine excelled at the patient cross-examination that exposes truth without theatrics. Professors often noted her talent for waiting out the noise until the essential point revealed itself. After graduation, she built a career defending everyday Texans, people who felt ignored until someone finally listened. Her cases ranged from civil rights disputes to complex constitutional issues, but a common thread ran through them all: a fierce belief that dignity belongs to everyone, even in the face of relentless opposition. In court, she learned that opponents who interrupt are often hoping you'll lose focus. Her answer was to center herself, breathe, and let the silence speak louder than their bluster. Those years on the front lines forged a steady presence that would later define her political life. When she decided to run for public office, local leaders remembered the attorney who showed up to community meetings after marathon days in court. Voters responded to her blend of steel and empathy. She didn't campaign with flashy slogans. She listened, then spoke with precision. Once in Congress, Crockett carried that approach to every committee room. Staffers quickly noticed her ability to stay unflappable during chaotic hearings. While others bristled at interruptions, she treated them like passing weather, acknowledging, never absorbing. Her guiding principle remained unchanged: hold your ground, but hold it with grace. So when she entered the chamber on the morning of the Cruz hearing, she brought more than prepared remarks. She brought a lifetime of training in composure. Every experience, from neighborhood cleanups to high-stakes trials, had rehearsed her for this exact kind of test. Reporters who'd followed her career sensed it too. One whispered to a colleague, "She doesn't rattle. He's going to underestimate that." Another replied, "That's her advantage. He thinks interruption equals control." What Cruz read as opportunity was, for Crockett, familiar terrain. She had faced aggressive opposing counsel, grandstanding politicians, and community crises where everyone talked but few listened. Her strength was never volume. It was the quiet certainty that the last word isn't always the loudest. As the sixth interruption faded and the chamber held its collective breath, Crockett adjusted her papers with the same calm she'd shown 100 times before. To the untrained eye, it was a simple movement. To those who knew her history, it was a signal. She was centered, ready, and unshakable. The audience sensed it. Social feeds lit up. That composure is unreal. She's got something planned. Watch. Every moment of her journey, childhood lessons in community, years of legal sparring, relentless public service, had distilled into this poised stillness. It wasn't passive. It was power waiting for the right moment to be revealed. And the next interruption, inevitable as a summer storm, was about to provide that moment. The committee room had settled into an almost eerie hush, the kind of quiet that makes every scrape of a chair sound like a cymbal crash. Senator Cruz leaned forward, a faint smile curving at the edge of his mouth. The pen in his right hand tapped a steady beat against the wood, a metronome counting down to the inevitable. Viewers in the livestream chat could feel it too. Here it comes, number 7. Representative Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She scanned her notes as though the world outside her page didn't exist. The quiet, deliberate turn of each sheet was louder than any retort. "Representative Crockett, if I may," Cruz began, his voice slicing through the chamber. First interruption. A ripple of murmurs. The chair rapped the gavel lightly, a polite but ineffective warning. Crockett simply looked up, composed. "Senator, if you'll allow me to finish," he didn't. The second interjection came almost on its own heels, layered with that practiced courtroom cadence. Reporters exchanged knowing glances. Camera operators zoomed tighter on Crockett's face. Third time. Fourth. By the fifth, staffers at the back exchanged nervous laughs that weren't quite laughter. The livestream comment feed flooded. "This is getting ridiculous. How does she stay so calm?" The sixth interruption landed like a gavel strike. Crockett paused mid-sentence, set her pen down, and folded her hands with a patience so deliberate it felt like strategy. Her eyes met Cruz's for a single, unbroken beat. It wasn't defiance. It was a reminder. Composure can be louder than any microphone. Across the aisle, Cruz adjusted his tie, clearly unaccustomed to silence being used as a counterargument. A few journalists later described the moment as the stillness before the storm. The chair cleared his throat. Let the representative finish, he urged. But the atmosphere had already shifted. Each interruption was no longer just a tactic. It was a countdown everyone could hear. Crockett exhaled slowly, the sound almost lost in the charged air. Her next words carried a subtle steel. Senator, I appreciate your enthusiasm. But if we're to serve the public, we must also respect the process. The room absorbed the line like a sudden breeze after heavy humidity. Somewhere in the back, a reporter's camera clicked, capturing a frame destined for headlines. And then, silence. Not the ordinary pause of a hearing, but the heavy quiet of a moment that feels predestined. Phones lit up across the nation. Chats scrolled so fast moderators gave up trying to keep pace. Everyone knew what came next. The seventh interruption was no longer just probable, it was inevitable. And when it arrived, it would ignite the spark that millions were waiting to see. A single second stretched like an entire minute. Every camera lens in the chamber narrowed to the space between two microphones. One for Senator Cruz, the other for Representative Jasmine Crockett. Cruz tapped his pen once, twice, and then, just as the chair opened his mouth to restore order, he leaned in. Representative, with all due respect, the seventh interruption. Gasps rippled across the hearing room like a sudden gust of wind. Reporters jerked their heads upward. Someone in the audience whispered, "Here we go." Crockett did not blink. Instead, she straightened her papers with deliberate calm, the subtle rasp of paper on wood somehow louder than Cruz's voice. She raised her gaze until it met his directly, a level stare that stopped him mid-sentence. The chamber seemed to tilt toward her, as if gravity itself had chosen a side. When she spoke, her voice was steady, low enough to force the room to listen. "Senator, I've patiently heard you 6 times. But respect is not a courtesy we ration. It is the foundation of this work. I will finish my statement now. No flourish, no raised volume, just unshakable authority." The effect was immediate. Cruz froze, caught in a silence that stretched longer than any speech. The chair hesitated, gavel hovering, then slowly lowered it. From the back row came the unmistakable sound of a single clap, quickly smothered, but enough to send a tremor of approval through the room. On the live stream, the comment feed erupted. "Did she just wow? That's how it's done. Clip this now." Crockett continued, her tone even, her words precise. "The American people deserve a dialogue, not a duel. I'm here to serve them, not to spar with interruptions. And I know my colleagues, on both sides, expect the same." The chamber remained pin-drop silent, the kind of silence that demands listening. Even the cameras seemed to hold their mechanical breath. Cruz shifted slightly in his chair. The trademark half-smile flickered, faltered, and disappeared. Crockett resumed her prepared remarks, each sentence a quiet assertion that the moment belonged to her. No grandstanding, no gloating, just the confident continuation of the testimony she'd been trying to deliver all along. The chair finally spoke, voice measured. "Representative Crockett, please proceed." It was more than permission. It was confirmation that the power dynamic had turned. Journalists scribbled furiously. Producers in newsrooms across the country barked for instant clips. Within seconds, hashtag 7th line and hashtag Crockett mic drop began trending on Twitter, the replay already looping across feeds. Meanwhile, in the chamber, Cruz remained silent. His pen no longer tapped. His eyes lowered briefly to the table before he leaned back in his chair, a rare retreat visible to everyone watching. Crockett closed her statement with a simple, resolute finish. "Let us show the nation that public service means patience, and that dignity, even when tested, remains undefeated." Applause wasn't permitted during official proceedings, yet an audible murmur of approval rose like distant thunder. The chair gave a subtle nod, as if acknowledging the collective sentiment. Crockett gathered her papers and offered a small, composed smile. There was no triumph in it, only the satisfaction of a principle upheld. And across millions of screens, viewers felt the subtle shiver of witnessing a turning point. Not a brawl, not a soundbite scuffle, a lesson in the quiet force of respect. The instant the gavel's echo faded, the hearing room seemed to vibrate with a collective exhale. Staffers glanced at one another in wide-eyed disbelief, as if to confirm that they had indeed witnessed what millions online would soon replay in slow motion. The confrontation was technically over, but the real storm was only beginning. Before the committee even recessed, Twitter transformed into a roaring arena. Hashtag 7th line rocketed to the top of national trends, overtaking playoff chatter and celebrity news in under 10 minutes. Screens across the country lit up with looping clips of Jasmine Crockett's poised mic drop response, each replay sharpening the contrast between her stillness and Cruz's sudden silence. TikTok creators moved at lightning speed. Some set the moment to dramatic orchestral swells, others to pulsing trap beats, each edit framing it as the kind of cultural event usually reserved for movie climaxes. Producers at major news networks scrambled to rewrite rundowns. Afternoon programming abruptly cut to breaking news banners. Anchors leaned forward in their chairs, eyes gleaming with the thrill of an unexpected viral sensation. A congressional confrontation for the ages, one declared as a split-screen replay showed Crockett's measured stare on a loop. Commentators dissected her tone, her pacing, even the way she adjusted her papers. Every gesture suddenly a masterclass in composure. Meanwhile, the comment sections were pure electricity. Viewers flooded livestream chats with messages like, "That's how you handle arrogance," and "She just redefined patience." Memes materialized in real time. One showed Cruz frozen mid-sentence with a buffering icon. Another overlaid Crockett's calm expression with the caption, "Volume down, power up." Outside the hearing room, reporters sprinted for hallways and phone signals. By the time Crockett emerged, a wall of cameras was waiting. Microphones jostled forward, but she remained unruffled. "I'm glad we were able to get back to the substance," she said, voice steady, offering no triumphant grin. That single sentence, gracious yet firm, circulated almost as quickly as the confrontation itself. From Capitol Hill to living rooms across the nation, the ripples spread. Parents replayed the clip for teenagers learning the basics of civil discourse. "This is how you win an argument without shouting," one father tweeted alongside the video. Teachers adjusted next day's lesson plans on the fly, labeling the incident a real-time civics class. Debate coaches cued the footage for practice sessions, pausing to highlight Crockett's unshaken body language. Corporate offices felt the tremor too. A marketing manager in Seattle opened a team meeting with the clip as a study in conflict resolution. HR trainers shared it on LinkedIn as a model of professional composure under pressure. One popular post read, "In every workplace, we face our own Ted Cruz. Here's how you stay grounded." Internationally, the moment crossed oceans before midnight. A London paper translated the 7th line into a headline about parliamentary grace under fire. A broadcaster in Seoul called it a global lesson in democratic dialogue. Commentators in Sao Paulo marveled at a silence louder than any speech. The exchange transcended U.S. politics. It became a symbol of restraint's universal power. Not everyone cheered, of course. Cruz's office released a carefully worded statement calling the hearing a spirited exchange of ideas, hoping to reframe the narrative. But the response barely dented the tide of admiration for Crockett. Even some conservative columnists, while defending Cruz's right to vigorous debate, conceded that repeated interruption undermines the dialogue we claim to value. The conversation had shifted from partisanship to principle. Back online, creative takes multiplied. Musicians remixed Crockett's decisive words into dance tracks. Graphic designers turned her silhouette into minimalist posters captioned, "Respect is power." Motivational speakers posted side-by-side videos comparing typical workplace conflicts to the hearing, urging followers to adopt the Crockett calm. A viral TikTok challenge dared users to respond to mock interruptions with equal poise. Through it all, Crockett refused to bask in the spotlight. When asked in a late-night interview how it felt to win the exchange, she simply said, "It wasn't about winning. It was about finishing a thought with respect for the process and the people we serve." That humility only intensified the admiration. Editorial boards took note. One major national daily published an op-ed titled "Composure as Courage," arguing that Crockett had reminded America of the quiet strength our institutions require. A prominent historian tweeted, "This will be studied as a cultural marker of how to face provocation with dignity." By the time midnight rolled around, the 7th line had become shorthand for a specific kind of victory. Not the crushing of an opponent, but the steadfast refusal to be pulled off course. Hashtags evolved. Hashtag Crockett calm. Hashtag respect over rhetoric. Hashtag patience is power. Each a distilled lesson from a single exchange. And the influence seeped beyond politics. Couples therapists referenced it in blogs about constructive communication. Leadership coaches cited it as evidence that authority doesn't require volume. In community forums, people shared personal stories of moments when staying calm turned conflict into cooperation, tagging them with hashtag 7th line as a badge of quiet triumph. Inside the Capitol, long after cameras packed away, staffers still spoke in hushed awe. "I've sat through hundreds of hearings," one aide whispered, "but I've never felt a room shift like that." The next morning, commuters scrolling their phones saw the clip before checking the weather. Coffee shop conversations pivoted from local gossip to "Did you see that?" Office chatter buzzed with admiration for a politician who turned silence into a strategy and grace into a headline. What had started as yet another congressional hearing had transformed into a cultural lightning bolt, a living proof that in an era addicted to noise, the calmest voice can still command the loudest attention. And as dawn broke on a new day, one truth had already settled in the public mind. Dignity, when tested, carries a force no interruption can match. Morning light spilled across the Capitol dome like a quiet spotlight, but the energy across the country felt anything but quiet. Overnight, the 7th line had evolved from a trending hashtag into a national meditation. What began as a single exchange in a committee room was now a cultural mirror, reflecting what people crave in public life, and, perhaps more importantly, what they crave in themselves. Across breakfast tables and commuter trains, people queued up the clip on their phones before even checking the weather. Cable anchors replayed the moment frame by frame, noting how Jasmine Crockett barely blinked as she delivered that calmly devastating sentence. Pundits on morning shows described it not as a political takedown, but as a lesson in moral authority. Comment sections read like confessions. One viewer wrote, "I didn't realize how much I needed to see someone choose respect over rage." Another admitted, "I showed this to my daughter to teach her that real strength is measured in composure." The language of victory had shifted. It was no longer about domination, but about discipline. When reporters asked Representative Crockett how it felt to become an overnight icon, she offered a single sentence that doubled as a credo. "Respect is the foundation of service. Without it, nothing we say matters." No chest beating, no viral catchphrase, just an insistence on first principles. That choice, again, became its own mic drop. Social feeds lit up with screenshots of her quote in elegant typography, overlaid on images of sunrise or city skylines, as if it were a mantra for a restless nation. By noon, the conversation had leapt far beyond the Beltway. School teachers revised lesson plans to include the clip as a case study in civil discourse. High school debate teams analyzed the hearing as if it were the final round of a championship, pausing to dissect Crockett's pauses, her tone, her unshaken posture. Parents forwarded the video to their kids with notes like, "This is how you win without yelling." Marriage counselors referenced it in workshops on constructive communication. Corporate trainers built it into presentations on leadership under pressure. On LinkedIn, a post titled "The Crockett Method, Grace Under Fire in the Workplace" racked up thousands of shares. Everyday people, baristas, bus drivers, students, shared personal stories of moments when they, too, had faced interruptions or disrespect and wished they'd held their ground with similar serenity. A popular TikTok trend emerged. Users reenacted their own 7th line moments, adding the hashtag patience is power to celebrate the quiet victories of daily life. Even some of Senator Cruz's usual allies acknowledged the deeper lesson. A conservative columnist wrote, "Yesterday we were reminded that a debate without respect is no debate at all." Crockett's restraint deserves recognition across party lines. It wasn't a surrender of ideology, it was a rare moment of shared values. Internationally, the story traveled like a spark on dry grass. A British editorial called it a masterclass in parliamentary grace. A broadcaster in Seoul highlighted it as an example of democratic dialogue the world should emulate. In Nairobi, a radio host described it as a reminder that true strength is measured in self-control. Across languages and cultures, people recognized something universal: the ability to remain unshaken in the face of provocation. Analysts pointed to a cultural fatigue with constant shouting. After years of political spectacle, here was a different kind of victory, one rooted in patience, not volume. Crockett hadn't simply out-argued her opponent. She demonstrated that the loudest person is rarely the strongest. Psychologists weighed in on morning podcasts. When we witness composure under fire, it calms our own nervous systems, one explained. It models emotional regulation in a society starved for it. The science gave language to what millions felt intuitively, the deep exhale of watching dignity triumph. But perhaps the most powerful impact was the way the seventh line became a call to action, not just for politicians, but for everyone. Commenters shared vows to pause before reacting in their own lives. A mother promised to listen fully before responding to her teenage son. A manager pledged to let employees finish thoughts without interruption, a college student wrote. Next time someone talks over me, I'll remember Jasmine. The message was simple but profound. You don't need a congressional microphone to embody respect. The seventh line wasn't about winning a debate on C-SPAN. It was about reclaiming the everyday power of patience. As the day wore on, new hashtags crystallized. Hashtag CrockettCalm. Hashtag respect over rhetoric. Hashtag dignity first. Community groups announced online forums to discuss civil discourse. A nonprofit launched a campaign encouraging schools to host Seventh Line Days, celebrating respectful dialogue. What began as a spark of admiration was quickly becoming a small but growing movement for a different kind of public conversation. Even late-night comedy, usually the realm of sharp jabs, treated the event as something more. One host concluded his monologue by saying, "In a world addicted to noise, the quietest voice tonight was the one we needed most." The audience didn't laugh, they applauded. By evening, the frenzy of clips and memes began to settle into something steadier, reflection. Across social media, a phrase emerged like a collective whisper: dignity is louder than anger. People weren't just entertained, they were inspired. The seventh line had revealed a truth we often forget, that the strength to stay grounded when provoked is a power no interruption can shake. Representative Crockett, for her part, kept the focus outward. In a brief closing interview, she said, "I'm grateful the moment resonated, but it's bigger than me. It's about how we choose to speak to each other as Americans, as neighbors, as human beings." That humility underscored the entire saga. This wasn't a story of one politician's clever comeback. It was the story of what respect can do when it walks calmly into a storm. The seventh line will live on as more than a political soundbite. It has become a mirror, challenging each of us to ask, when was the last time I listened without rushing to respond? How do I handle someone who interrupts or underestimates me? What would it mean to choose dignity over outrage, even when provoked? These questions reach far beyond the marble halls of Congress. They belong at kitchen tables, in classrooms, in boardrooms, and in every heated comment thread. In the end, the enduring lesson is beautifully simple. Patience is power. True authority doesn't need to shout. It simply stands firm. Jasmine Crockett didn't just destroy an opponent. She illuminated a path for all of us. The next time tempers flare, whether in politics, at work, or in the smallest corners of daily life, millions will remember the Congresswoman who chose steadiness over spectacle and, in doing so, won something far greater than an argument. That is the real victory of the seventh line. Not a mic drop, but a quiet revolution of respect. The clip of Jasmine Crockett's seventh line now lives far beyond the marble halls where it began. But the real story isn't just a viral moment. It's a reminder of what public service and citizenship itself can still be. When noise filled the chamber, she answered with composure. When interruption tried to drown out dialogue, she chose clarity over chaos. And in doing so, she gave us all a lesson. Dignity is the most disarming force in politics. If that struck a chord with you, don't let it stop here. Share this story with someone who's tired of the shouting. Start a conversation about how we can all hold our ground without raising our voices. And if you want to see more stories where truth and respect take center stage, hit subscribe and join this community that believes in a higher standard. Because every time we elevate patience over provocation, every time we insist on listening before speaking, we help build the kind of democracy worth fighting for. The seventh line wasn't just a mic drop. It was a call to action for all of us.